Before modernism, specifically modernism in art, how did the West view art? How did our ancestors think about it? What was it? What did it mean? What was its purpose? That's what we're going to be looking at today. Hello world, I'm the Gentleman Poet. I'm going to be reading to you today. If you've always dreamt of being read to by an extraordinarily handsome man with a voice of silk and honey, you've come to the right place. So go ahead, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. It would really help me out. So today, we're going to be reading The Philosophy of Art, The Meaning and Relations of Sculpture, Painting, Poetry, and Music by Edward Howard Griggs, written in 1913. And for those of you with short attention spans, we'll just do a little bit of a brief summary of the introduction before we get into it. So EH Griggs wrote this book on art, but it's not a book on art per se, or a technical manual on how to make art. Instead, it is a work on the philosophy of aesthetics, but not just general aesthetics. Instead, it is the particular aesthetic of each of those specific arts, that is sculpture, painting, poetry, and music, and specific to classic Western culture. That kind of sums up the introduction, other than he gives three misconceptions on the purposes of art. First, the idea that art is just the superfluous thing, a decoration, just a pretty thing to look at, something simply to be enjoyed. Second, that art is not that, but actually meant for specific moral teaching, some sort of autodidactic message. And third, and this, he claims, is a view held by the artists themselves, that art is a means of displaying technical prowess in art itself. That is, art for art's sake, in a sense. And with that, that kind of gives us a wrap on the introduction. And we'll begin the reading. Enjoy. Actually, don't enjoy yet. One last thing, in the description you will find links to information on all of the artists whose work is shown in the video, and then with that, links to the different books that Mr. Griggs references in his work, so that you can do your own reading if you want a little more deeper understanding of the things that he's talking about. And with that, now you can enjoy. Thank you. The Philosophy of Art by Edward Howard Griggs. Introduction. The aim of this study is to show what art is, how it comes out of the life of man, and what specific function each of the great ideal arts fulfill in relation to the human spirit. There is great need of such study today. We in America have been turning with remarkable interest and enthusiasm to all fields of art and intellect. It would seem that the splendid energy which has built up our wonderful material civilization is now to find expression in the life of the spirit, with the promise of equally great achievement there. There is scarcely an important city in the land that is not at least the beginnings of a museum of sculpture and painting. Opportunities for hearing great music have been multiplied several times within a few decades. Gifts to education and to all aspects of culture have increased enormously, while even more significant of our spirit is the extent to which we send our students abroad. In any European school of fine art, at least half the students not native to the country in question are American. In other words, we send to foreign schools more students than all the other nations taken together. Of course, we ought to do so, for we are a youthful people and need to learn from the accumulated culture of the older world. But the significance of our action is no less great. All these signs, with the increasing patronage of the arts by wealth and power, mean much more for our happiness, our culture, as a people, and our contribution to the world. Unfortunately, this great movement is sadly hampered by ignorance and worse, by flagrant misconceptions as to the meaning and function of the arts. Turn to the literature of the subject. There is admirable material on the technical aspects of the arts, and excellent history and criticism. But where is any adequate study of the specific power and limitations of each of the arts in expressing and interpreting the human spirit? Lessing's Laocoön is still the best book we have on the subject. While it is far behind the experience in what ought to be the thinking of our time, and attempted at most only to define the mutual limits of the plastic arts and poetry. Really, the great books in the field we are attempting include hardly more beside Lessing's than Leonardo's notebooks, Wagner's writing, and Schiller's aesthetic essays. Worse than the ignorance and lack of thought are the prevailing misconceptions. The most widely accepted of these is in the mind of the general public. It is the notion that art is a dispensable luxury, a polite adornment of life, pleasant enough where there is ample wealth and leisure, but of no value until the serious business of life is fulfilled. Utterly wrong as this notion is, it is nevertheless taken for granted by the multitude, not only in the unthinking mass, but in circles of wealth, social prominence, and even of supposed culture. Indeed, the fault is old and long enduring. For the cry of the artist in all epochs has been that his work is not taken as the serious aim of life it is, but as advantageous adornment of the more or less superficial amenities of social existence. Carlyle voices this in Teufelsdröckh, who resents being made polite fringe on Lady Somebody's aesthetic tea, while Goethe's study of the behavior of the emperor and court towards Helena in the second part of Faust is the most scathing portrayal I know in literature of the whimsical reaction of the world of polite society on the miraculous creation of beauty which should inspire silent awe. How prevalent the same attitude is today. Consider the behavior of persons wandering through a gallery of paintings saying, "I like this," or "dislike that," as if they had the right to like or dislike until they had appreciated and understood what of human thought and feeling is given, and with what measure of adequacy and harmony. Go to the Metropolitan Opera House in New York, when some masterpiece of Wagner is given. Where do you find the true music lovers? Oh, everywhere, of course. One wants to be fair, but many of them are standing up in the top gallery, while of the high-priced boxes in the great oval many are empty the first hour and empty the last half-hour, society displaying itself in its clothes as at any other function with no notion of the attitude necessary to the creation and appreciation of true art. There is, of course, another side to this which all great artists have understood. Art can have no higher function than in transfiguring the life of this moment. What is posterity, if not men and women such as we, and why should the artist work for some future time and not for the living world about him? Leonardo da Vinci, painter of perhaps the greatest picture the world has seen, the ruined masterpiece on Milan monastery wall, was willing to use his unparalleled genius to prepare some masque or other artistic pleasure for the court circle at Milan, given once and never repeated, and Goethe himself was glad to employ the genius that created Faust in some like service for the group at Weimar. Then, however, art is made a mere pleasant fringe and polite decoration to the more or less superficial and often frivolous activities of social life. The wrong thing is taken for the center, and art is prostituted. A second error, only less harmful than the first, prevails also in the mind of the public, though not so widely. It is very good persons who make this mistake, often with fanatical earnest. Their error is in holding that art is justified by some obvious didactic moral teaching. They accept the drama or novel if it preaches some sermon, the painting if it carries a moral lesson. Goethe has sufficiently characterized this point of view. He says, "A good work of art can and will indeed have moral consequences, but to require moral ends of the artist is to destroy his profession." To destroy his profession. The phrase is not too strong. Insofar as the artist becomes preacher, he is apt to cease to be artist. since his didactic moral is so much more limited than the aim of art, which is the presentation of the whole truth of life in a form of beauty. The artist must strive for the abiding truth rather than its changing application. If he deals with the issue of the hour, it must be in no narrow, partisan spirit, but with the vision of the eternal through the transient. Compare Charles Kingsley's Alton Locke with Goethe's Wilhelm Meister to see the difference between the literature of propagandism, even of superior excellence in art. A certain withdrawal from life and its feverish conflict is always necessary for the artist that he may have perspective. To create art, one must have lived, but to create art one must have also withdrawn from life to the mountain height of spiritual isolation, thus always the loneliness and pain of the great artist. Sometimes it finds tender and sad expression as in Shelley and Chopin. Sometimes it causes the despairing reaction of Leopardi or Schopenhauer. Sometimes it produces the grave irony of a Goethe or a Wagner. But always it is present, and the vision of the artist is bought with the pain of being consciously apart. Thus the true moral value of a work of art is in the nature of the work itself, not in an Aesop fable's moral appended at the end. Suppose Shakespeare had affixed to Othello a statement that he had meant to teach us the ugliness of jealousy, with what a pitiful anticlimax it would have been. If the moral meaning is not involved in the very nature of a work of art, then it is bad art. No, art is not for preaching's sake any more than it is for adornment's sake, and many of the good people are as far wrong as the frivolous. These two errors in the public mind have helped breed a third prevailing among artists themselves, the notion that art exists for the sake of exhibiting technical skill in the mastery of difficulties. The great men have never made this mistake. They invariably have recognized that technical skill is never an end at all, but always a means, a glorious one, to something beyond itself. But among lesser artists the superstition is widely prevalent. It is easy to see how it arises. Probably there never was an earnest student beginning to learn a particular art who did not look forward to creating his masterpiece. The young poet dreams of his Divine Comedy or Faust, the painter of the ceiling of some new Sistine chapel, the musician of compositions that shall rival Beethoven, the sculptor of his Periclean marbles and his brooding figures on fresh Medicean tombs. With such aspirations invariably the student begins, but what happens? Soon he discovers that the road he must travel is painfully long and beset with hard obstacles. The embryonic painter, for example, finds he must wholly subordinate his own ideas drawn for years from the antique before he is allowed even to begin to copy nature. Only after long discipline in drawing may he add color, and how long is the road before any self-expression is permitted? Thus he is apt to forget all about the end which originally he had in view, and become absorbed wholly in conquering the difficulties in the path. To acquire and exhibit such skill comes more and more to seem itself the aim. The just reaction against seeking an advantageous end for art accentuates this tendency. I have always sympathized with the painter's protest against such a view of their art as Ruskin preached. Ruskin's work was strong and permanently helpful, but in all his study of painting he sought some definitely moral or religious end in the effect of the art, yet beauty in its own sufficient justification. Art need seek no end outside itself, and thus arises the cry art for art's sake. On a high plane this is right, but when art for art's sake is interpreted to mean art for technique's sake, for the sake of exhibiting technical skills in mastering difficulties, then art is reduced to the level of a juggler's tricks, or refined gymnastic. To walk a tightrope without a balancing pole shows admirable technical skill, but surely it is not fine art in the same sense as painting. Technical skill, excellent and desirable as it is always a means and never an end in itself, and the exhibition of it merely evidences power which is vain unless used for some aim worthwhile. The third error is thus as far from the truth as either of the others, yet one would scarcely believe how prevalent it is among the rank and file of artists. Listen to a group of painters commenting upon the pictures of a gallery. Of what do they speak? Of the way that landscape rests and calms the spirit? Of the sweep of humanity in this portrayal of common life? No. But of the skill with which the lighting is handled here, the fault in the composition there, the method of putting on his colors which this painter has employed. It is natural. They are constantly working with these technical problems, and thus they look for the handling of them in the work of others. The result, however, is the focusing of their attention almost wholly on the means employed. Sit behind a group of musical artists during the rendering of a Beethoven symphony or a Wagner opera. Do they speak of the power of the music to sweep one out of the bosom of the sea of emotion, to refresh the spirit and give the vision of the ideal? No, but of the skill with which the note struck. The admirable rendering of this difficult passage by the violins. The fault in the conductor's reading of that other passage. Indeed, it is even possible for the mind to become so absorbed in the analysis of technique as actually to lose in power of appreciation. One finds cases where a student has worked 10 years in mastering the technique of an art, and at the end of that time has really less power to appreciate spontaneously the art than when he began his study. This need not happen and ought not to happen, but the fact that it does occur shows how far the mastery and exhibition of technical skill is from the true aim of art. No art is not for technique's sake, any more than it is for adornment's sake or preaching's sake. These three misconceptions stand in the way of our right use of art today, and we must overcome them to make our contribution as a people and to give art the place it should occupy in our culture. Art is serious business. Beauty is the most useful thing we know. The ideal is no less real than the coarsest material end. Art is for life's sake. There are thus three underlying questions in the study here undertaken. First, what is art? Second, what does art do to the artist who creates? Third, what does art do to the student who appreciates? The study deals primarily with the four great ideal types of art: sculpture, painting, music, and poetry. Architecture, so largely conditioned by utility, will be considered in comparison, as will the composite arts, song, opera, dramatic portrayal. The method employed is not a review of philosophy and criticism of art, but a study of selected masterpieces in each field, asking what these do to our senses, emotions, imagination, and intellect. This is merely applying to the realm of art the method universally insisted upon in all natural science, namely, first finding the facts, and then seeking to discover what these mean. In art, as in science, a little direct first-hand study is worth more than much reading of theory. In this work, if I may speak personally, what I have to offer is at least my own, not a restatement of criticism and philosophy, but the condensed result of 25 years' study of works of art in each of the four fields, recording and interpreting what these masterpieces have done to my senses, emotions, imagination, and intellect. The same method must be employed by each student if he would arrive at clear conceptions of the meaning and function of these several fine arts, and the reflection and conclusions tentatively offered in the following chapters should be used as a challenge to the reader's own mind on the basis of his own first-hand study of masterpieces in the respective fields.